Have you ever looked at one of Zaha Hadid's buildings and thought, how on earth did someone come up with that? Those melting white waves of concrete, the impossible curves that look more like frozen motion than architecture. Zaha Hadid didn't just design white buildings. She completely reimagined what architecture could be. Her designs weren't random or futuristic for the sake of it. They came from a deep philosophy about movement, freedom, and breaking away from the rigid what we live in. Hi, I'm MAXXI, and today we're diving into the mind of the Queen of Curves to understand why she designed the way she did. For Zaha Hadid, architecture wasn't about boxes or blueprints. It was about ideas. She once said, there are 360 degrees. Why stick to one? That single line pretty much sums up her approach. She hated the idea that architecture had to be straight, safe, or predictable. Hadid believed buildings should express freedom. The same freedom we feel when we move through a city or landscape, or even a thought. Her architecture was like a rebellion against gravity, against the grid, against tradition itself. She used architecture as a language, a way to say, we don't have to live in straight lines anymore. So, when you see those following liquid forms in her work, they're not just aesthetic, they're a symbol of liberation. Liberation from the old rules, from rigidity, from the idea that buildings have to look like boxes stacked on boxes. Hadid was born in Baghdad in 1950. A time when the city was modern, experimental, and full of cultural optimism. Her father was a politician who believed in progress and reform, and that shaped her worldview. The belief that design can actually change how people live. Later, when she studied in London, she discovered Russian avant-garde art, especially suprematism. A movement obsessed with abstract geometry and movement. Artists like Kazimir Malevich painted shapes that look like they were floated in space. Hadid took that idea and asked, what if a building could float like that? What if architecture could feel weightless? That question became her life's work. She started painting buildings instead of drawing them, not because she couldn't draw, but because she wanted to think beyond the page. In her paintings, buildings exploded, twisted, and merged with landscapes. They looked impossible, and for decades, people actually told her they were impossible. For years, she was called a paper architect. But those impossible drawings became the foundation for a new way of thinking about space. Zaha Hadid once said, architecture is really about well-being. I think that people want to feel good in a space. To her, that meant spaces that moved emotionally and physically. In her buildings, walls don't just separate rooms. They flow into ceilings, merge into floors, and twist into staircases. It's as if the entire building is caught in motion. That sense of movement was deeply philosophical to her. She believed life itself is dynamic. Cities change, people move, ideas evolve. So architecture should capture that same energy. In her view, the rigid boxy modernism of the past couldn't express the complexity of modern life anymore. So she replaced the static with the fluid. Her MAXXI museum in Rome, for example, doesn't even have a front or a back. It's a network of flowing paths and ramps, like a river delta frozen in concrete. It doesn't tell you where to go, it lets you wander. That's the essence of her philosophy: architecture as an experiment, not a rule book. Hadid's work always pushed against what she called the tyranny of the right angle. She joked that her teachers used to call her the inventor of 89 degrees, because nothing in her designs was met at a perfect right angle. To her, straight lines represented control, the mechanical logic of modern life. Curves, on the other hand, represented life itself. She once said, "Life is not made in a grid." That's why her buildings often feel alive. The Heydar Aliyev Center in Baku, that giant white form that rises from the ground like a wave, was designed to blur the boundary between the city and the building. It's as if the earth itself just lifted to become architecture. For Hadid, that was the goal: to erase the line between landscape and structure, between outside and inside, between art and engineering. Her philosophy wasn't about making weird shapes. It was about showing that buildings can flow with the same rhythm as the world around them. When digital design software came along in the 2000s, it was like someone handed her the tools she had been dreaming of her whole life. Those impossible curves could finally be modeled, tested, and built. She embraced technology not just for precision, but as a way to expand creativity. Her team, led with her partner Patrick Schumacher, called their approach parametricism, basically using algorithms to design fluid organic forms. But Hadid's goal wasn't to make computer architecture. It was to explore how architecture could mirror the complexity of nature and society. For her, the future wasn't something cold and mechanic. It was fluid, adaptive, and full of potential. Every project, from the Guangzhou Opera House to the London Aquatic Centre, was a little experiment in what the future might feel like. Zaha Hadid wasn't just designing for aesthetics. She was making cultural statements. Her very career was one: a woman from Iraq rising to become one of the most celebrated architects in the world, in a field dominated by men. That alone carried philosophical weight. She rarely talked about feminism directly, but her architecture screamed independence. It was unapologetic, ambitious, and unafraid of being misunderstood. She once said, "If I had followed the rules, I wouldn't be where I am." Her buildings, bold, unconventional, and often controversial, reflected the same mindset. They told people that imagination mattered, that the world doesn't move forward by repeating the same forms, and that design can embody freedom. And that's really what ties her entire body of work together: the idea that architecture should be a catalyst for change, not just physically, but emotionally and culturally. When Zaha Hadid passed away in 2016, she left behind more than just a collection of stunning buildings. She left a philosophy, a challenge to every architect and designer. Don't design what's easy. Design what's necessary to imagine something new. Her work asks us to see space not as something to be filled, but as something to be discovered. It asks us to believe that architecture can feel like art, fluid, emotional, alive, and maybe, most importantly, it reminds us that rules are meant to be broken, especially when breaking them leads to something extraordinary. Because in Zaha Hadid's world, architecture isn't just about shelter.